Thank you. Can everybody hear okay? Yes? Okay. So again, I'm Diane Baima. My mother is in the back there, Florence Shebetka. And I grew up in this congregation. I was baptized here. I was confirmed here. And every summer when I come home, I come with my mom to church here. So I have been living in Ukraine since 2014. I moved there to work at an international school. I was teaching 5th grade. And in 2016, I met my Yuri. And in 2019, we got married. And in 2020, I moved out to his little hobby farm. So we've been together on the farm since then. Our marriage has been through COVID and then now war. So that's what our first 6 years of marriage has been. This is a picture of Yuri and his mother and me. This is a few years ago. His mother has recently fell and she can't walk so well anymore, but she keeps trying. That's why he can't come to visit right now. These are some of our lambs from this spring. We have a hobby farm. It's completely hobby. We have a lot of animals and fruit trees and berry bushes. So here's some more of our animals. We have our third dog, and we have 12 sheep, 6 rams, and 6 ewes, and 1 goat, and 2 cats, and 5 chickens. So that's our little family. Along with all the fruit trees and berry bushes that my husband loves to grow. This is a map of Kyiv, and you can see the little heart down here is where we live on our farm. Here's all of Kyiv, the city. This is where my school, where I will be going to work this fall. And this red dot is the school where I started working at and where I worked this past year. It's a long story, but so I had to work in Kyiv this last year and only drive home on weekends. Well, okay. So my husband was all alone on the farm most of the year, and I was only able to help on weekends. So I had to spend the week in Kyiv with all of the air raids, all the bombings and everything else instead of on our little farm. So it was a year. So this past year I was teaching middle school, and I wanted to explain to you that we as teachers, we want to give our kids whatever we can to make their lives as normal as possible while they're still living through a war. So this is a picture of them at Halloween. I had 6th grade, 11-year-olds. This was their Halloween. This was them giving a presentation. This was, we celebrated Chinese New Year with red envelopes and lucky money. So I just wanted to have an idea that the kids, we do everything so that they can have a great time. What's it like for them? So, if your school has a bomb shelter, you can have in-person learning. If your school does not have a bomb shelter, you have to have remote learning. So, let's see. We had to, if the alarm goes off, we have about 3 minutes to get ourselves to the basement. I have to tell them what books to bring or what materials to bring and get to the basement. Now, with middle school, it was not too bad. But this next year, I'll be going back to teaching 1st grade and getting 1st graders down 3 flights of stairs, change your shoes, put on your coats, get out 3 flights of stairs, out of the school and into the bomb shelter is always an amazing feat for us. With the middle schoolers at that school, the bomb shelter was in the school, so it was a lot easier for us. This is some pictures of a service learning project that my students did this year to support the Ukrainian army. So the kids raised money. They were selling things that they had made at a school art fair. They made and sent valentines and care packages to the soldiers, and they did a plastic bottle top drive. So the plastic is used both to make parts of drones and also to raise money for the Army. And this picture is one of my colleagues, her brother is a soldier, and so he came and spoke to the class and thanked them for all their work. And we hide his face because he's wanted, so. This was at the end of the year for our middle and high school students at this school. We had a week without walls. We tried to do everything we could like we'd done before the war and before COVID to make them. So the kids have a week of without school. They were team building and having fun. So we had a rope course, a zoo, outdoor history museum, indoor amusement park, and their highlight was, if you can imagine, to stay overnight at school with so 18 children, 3 teachers, and we slept in the kind of the basement, the bomb shelter, but also it's a nice bomb shelter at school. So they loved it. I obviously didn't get any sleep, but anyway, it's their highlight of their year. So we just try to continue their education as best as we can, depending on where we are, if we're in the classroom or whether in their bomb shelter, and that's what all the teachers are doing in Ukraine. And even those students who are out of the country, most Ukrainian kids that I know who are out of the country, they're following the curriculum for where they are, Germany, and all of the Ukrainian curriculum. So they're doing double classes because they want to keep up with their Ukrainian. So here we go. My brother told me that I should tell you about Ukrainian history because he said people don't understand why Ukrainian wants independence. They just don't understand it. So I'm here to tell you about Ukrainian history. I hope this doesn't go too long. I had a hard time stopping once I started. It's dear to my heart. So Russia has been trying to erase Ukrainians' history for hundreds of years. Hundreds and hundreds of years. So Russia essentially has stolen Ukraine's history because they wanted to be considered the only legitimate successor to this Kievan Rus. So Kievan Rus was founded between 1862 and 1237. It is, as you can see on the map, this stretch of land between the Baltic and the Black Sea. The first leader was actually of Viking origin. So he was not Slavic. The Slavs at that time invited the Vikings to become their leaders. And it was a Viking-ruled country. And Kiev became their capital. I highly recommend you look into this more. I'm going to try to be fast. In the 10th century, in 1988, Kievan Rus accepted Christianity. So, and in 1037, this cathedral was built. It was built based on the model in Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. And it's standing today. It's a beautiful cathedral in the center of Kiev. But on June 10th, 2025, the church was damaged by Russian drones. So although Russia claims that they are the legitimate successors to Kievan Rus, they were bombing their founding cathedral. It wasn't damaged very much, but still it was heartbreaking to see that our cathedral got damaged. Times of conquest. So outside of Kievan Rus, it is a sad, sad history that Ukraine, the territory of Ukraine had. The Mongols conquered Kievan Rus in 1237. From 1349 to 1430, Western and Northern Ukraine became part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. So under that, the Polish landowners were in control of all the land. So in 1648, there was a Cossack rebellion. This is the first time that we see that the Ukraine wants to become independent. It was already in 1648 that they wanted to become the Hetman, they're called. They formed a rebellion to go against the Polish landowners. So already, hundreds of years ago, we see this drive for independence. Unfortunately, those Hetman the Russian Empire came in and said, we will help you to fight against these Polish landowners. They sided with the Hetman. They won freedom from the Polish landowners, but then Russia took this territory as a vassal of Russia. And in 1686, we see that the Russian Empire takes the red. The greenish is still the Polish Lithuanian Empire. The very tiny part over there is part of yellow, is part of Hungary, the Kingdom of Hungary. And this is part of the Crimean Khanate, and this is part of the Ottoman Empire. So Ukraine at that time was divided into many parts. Now we'll jump to the 17th century through 1917. The territory of Ukraine was annexed by the Russian Empire and the Habsburg Empire, so the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Now, I won't go into everything about this, but I could. It's very interesting. But this little part that was annexed by Austria-Hungary versus these parts that were annexed by Russia lived very different lives. One important one was under Russian Empire, Ukrainian books, theater, education was outlawed. Under the Habsburg Empire, it was allowed, but the Poles were the landowners. Polish was the dominant language. Under the Russian Empire, the governors of the area were appointed from St. Petersburg. Under the Habsburg Empire, they were the Polish landowners. Under the Russian Empire, the Jews were persecuted and confined to specific areas. Under the Habsburg area, they were assimilated into society. And last but not least, the church. So the Ukrainian church at that time under Russian Empire was abolished and absorbed into the Russian Orthodox Church. The Ukrainian church under the Austro-Hungarian Empire was renamed to the Greek Catholic Church, and they became part of the Roman Catholic Church. So if you go to Ukraine, which I hope you will someday, you will see a west-east, that there are more Orthodox churches in the eastern half and more Catholic churches in the western half because of their history. So you can see Ukraine has a complex past. In one part where they were the epicenter of Europe during the Kievan Rus, Kievan Rus was the central part of Europe. Again, it's a long story, but it's very, very interesting. The poor little princesses who got married off to France and to other kingdoms, they wrote to their parents saying, no, please don't make us live here, because at that time, Kievan Rus was very modern, very civilized, and the other kingdoms of Europe were not civilized. It was dirty, it was dark, and they wanted to just come back home to Kiev. And now we come to this other part where Ukraine is fought over by other empires. So this continues in the 20th century Ukraine. So let's begin. On this side, we have Russia. In March 1917, Tsar Nicholas abdicated his throne in Russia. So the revolution begins in Russia, which, remember, Ukraine is part of the Russian Empire. Immediately, Ukrainian organizations created a Central Rada in Kyiv, and they worked to create an independent Ukraine. So it's not something new that Ukraine wants to be independent. It's been going on for centuries, and this past century, it's been the top of their goals. November, the Bolsheviks took over the government in Russia, and in December, the Bolsheviks tried to take over the government in Kyiv. They didn't succeed, so they set up their own government in Kharkiv, which is a city in eastern Ukraine. January 22nd, 1918, Ukraine declares itself independent. Right. So, you might notice that during that time, there was World War I going on. So, during all of this time, Ukraine is at war as part of the Russian Empire. When the Bolsheviks took over, they stopped the war. They had their own treaty with Germany in March of 1918. They signed an alliance. They gave over gave over their land in Ukraine, the Baltics, Poland, and Finland. The Russian Empire gave those up. Ukraine, again, declared itself independent, but no, Germany came in and put in a puppet government during that time to control Ukraine. But in November, again, Germany loses the war and has to give up Poland and Ukraine. Again, so Germany loses the war, it gives up its land. Ukraine declares itself independent again. But from 1918 to 1921, Poland is trying to get land in Ukraine, and the Bolsheviks with Russia are trying to get the land in Ukraine. So it's a constant back and forth of civil war through all of this time. 1921, 1922, Russia and Poland sign another treaty, and Russia is now divided by Poland, Russia, Hungary, and the newly formed Czechoslovakia. A small part is part of Czechoslovakia.
On that last map, could you point out where Ukraine is?
Oh, sure. Let's go back. So Ukraine is, here you go. There's Ukraine. So, okay, we're on to Soviet oppression which is the same as Russian oppression. All the time, whenever you see Soviet, the Russians were in charge. So the Soviets, from 1922 to 1926, they began a Ukrainization policy. Sorry, I was wrong language. Here's what they did. They wanted people to support their new Soviet Republic of Ukraine. They had a long-term plan for this. They allowed Ukrainian in schools. They allowed theater. They allowed Ukrainians to have small businesses. They allowed a lot of freedom in Ukraine, but this was for a short time. Their long-term plan was to disarm the population. You remember, all of these wars are going on, everybody's armed. If they let people settle down and start farming again, they'll put away their weapons, they'll stop being prepared to fight all the time. They wanted the people disarmed. They wanted to see who was still going to rebel. If most people are settling down and working and farming and a few are rebelling, it's easier to send those people away and execute them than to figure out from the whole population. And just to give Ukraine a false sense of security. So, 1927, Lenin dies. Stalin becomes the leader of the Soviet Union. New policies. From 1928 to 1932, we have these new policies of industrialization and collectivization. Industrialization means that they were using Ukraine's natural resources to industrialize the country. Collectivization meant they wanted everybody's private land. Remember, this is an agricultural country. They wanted all the farmers to give up their lands and have kind of like farming factories. So everybody had to live within a collectivized zone, and all of your input was given to everybody. And these were called 5-year plans, and they were told how much they had to grow, how much they had to give up for each of these 5-year plans to meet these plans. Well, if you are a great farmer, you don't want to do this because you are a great farmer and you can supply for your family. And you don't want to give up everything you've worked for. If you are a poor farmer or somebody who doesn't want to do any work, this is a great plan for you because other people are going to be doing your work for you and you get to eat. You get to do what you want. So these people who had little skill, little common sense, I would say, but a lot of greed were being put into powerful places within these villages, and the people who had the power lost everything. So here we come to one of the saddest parts of Ukrainian history. And I bet most of you don't know this, but there was from 1932 to 1934, there was something called Holodomor. Stalin just kept putting higher and higher quotas on the Ukrainian farmers for food, to the point where they started, the soldiers would come and they'd take everything. They'd take the seed food, they'd take the storage, they took all the animals. There was nothing left for the people who lived in Ukraine. This was done on purpose to break the society and to give all the food to those in Russia, to give it to the people who were in power. During this time, between so this Holodomor, which is what it is in Ukrainian, is called death. It means death by starvation. And between 4 to 10 million people died during that time. Remember, this is right after all of these other wars. 4 to 10 million died. The reason why it's 4 to 10 million is because it's the very conservative is 4 million that say exactly starvation. But most people, you don't die just of starvation, you die of some other illness because of starvation. And it was hidden. It was very, very much hidden from everybody what was happening. The books were hidden, the records were changed. If you helped, I'll get into this more, but if you helped do this, you were then also eliminated because they didn't want anyone to know the Soviets didn't want anyone to know what they were doing. It's also a very, very interesting part of history if you'd like to look into it more. But usually it's called Holodomor. Right after that, Stalin begins his Great Purge. So Stalin had a political campaign to eliminate anyone in the Communist Party, or anybody, who he considered a threat to his power. Overall, 750,000 people were executed in all of the Soviet Union at the time, and more than 1 million were sent to forced labor camps called gulags. In Ukraine, this meant about 270,000 people were arrested and half of those were executed. So you were put into a train and sent off to Siberia. When you got there, they had nothing for you. You had to start building a house. You had to start everything from scratch without any help. So most of the people died. What's very interesting about this purge was that a lot of the people who were purged were the people who had helped with Holodomor. Anybody who helped was also purged because the government didn't want anyone to know that all these atrocities had been committed. So the more they could kill, the less they could track what had been done. 1938. Stalin sends his new lieutenant, Nikita Khrushchev, off to Ukraine to continue repressing the Ukrainians and to get them ready for war. So, on to World War II. I want you to remember, really importantly, that whenever you're listening to the news and you're listening to Russian propaganda, that the first people who appeased Hitler were the Russians, were the Soviets. They had a pact with, in 1939, they formed a pact with Nazi Germany to split Poland, which included parts of Ukraine, down the middle, to appease Hitler. So whenever you hear about Russia, we won the war for everybody, remember that they were also the people who were first appeasing the Germans, the Nazis. So, 1939, the Germans was the pact, but this treaty didn't last because in 1941, the Nazis made a surprise attack on the Soviet Union. This meant, if you look at the map, that what's first, Belarus, Ukraine, they're the first ones. So when Russia also talks about, we are the heroes of this war, we are the heroes of this war, the battles were fought with us, 3% of Russia was controlled by the Nazis during the war. All 100% of Ukraine, 100% of Belarus was controlled by the Nazis. The Nazis came in, they got all the way past through Ukraine the first time, and then when they were losing, the fighting went all the way back. So Ukraine had to deal with most of the fighting in the war. Now, during the war, again, they say about 8 to 14 million Ukrainians died in World War II. My mother-in-law was born in 1934. She lived through World War II. She talks about, I know it's popular to do foraging now for different wild greens, and she looks at me like, I'm not eating that. I ate that during the war. I will not eat that. So if it looks like a wild green, she doesn't want it because it reminds her of the war. 2.5 million soldiers, at least 6 million civilians, and at least 1.5 million Jews. Now, during this time, you might hear that Putin talks about how Ukraine is full of Nazis. You might hear, I don't know if you hear this at all, about Nazis, 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 Ukrainian is Nazi. First, this isn't true. Ukrainians are not Nazis, okay? When the Nazis invaded Ukraine during World War II, remember what the Ukrainians had been going through under the Soviets. They looked at Germany, maybe, hopefully, some people said, oh, maybe that these Germans would be better leaders than the Soviets. They wanted independence, but they hoped that this would be better. Some people did. Remember, they'd been starved, they'd lost all their property, they'd lost their language, they'd lost their culture, and the Soviets had purged all of their religious leaders, their political leaders, and their intellectual leaders. There wasn't a lot of leadership left. And so when these Nazis came in, of course they lied, and some people followed them. But the Nazis also wanted to starve the Ukrainians so that they could take over this fertile land. The Nazis had them as slave labor. Obviously, they killed all of the Jews. You hear about concentration camps. In Ukraine, they didn't bother with concentration camps. They just dug a hole and shot everybody. So, Ukraine is not a Nazi country. It never was. There's always people who were looking to get away from the Soviets. And those people maybe helped the Germans at first, but then, of course, we all realized that they were of no help either. Post-war Ukraine. After the war, Stalin is one of the leaders, one of the winners, and he wants to control Eastern Europe. So one of the ways to control countries that have been through a war is through food. So again, he created another famine in Ukraine between 1946 and 1947 because he took the food, sent it to other countries in Europe, sent it to Germany, sent it to Poland, sent it to Hungary, etc., in order to help their socialist governments, their communist governments set up power. So this was a way to do that by providing food. And the people in Ukraine starved some more. Other really important dates in history was that by 1954, the Russians in power in Moscow felt that Ukraine was subdued, that they had enough control over Ukraine. They gave them back the little peninsula down here of Crimea. So Crimea became a part of the Ukrainian Socialist Republic. 1986 was another horrible time in oh dear. You're not going to let me read it. Okay. So 1986, a reactor at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant exploded. The government, the Soviet government, tried to cover it up. My husband was alive and living less than 100 miles away. They tried to cover it up. They had May Day parades. They sent children out to parades while there was radiation coming down on the sky. They tried to cover it up from other countries too. It's another part of history that that you might want to look into it more. But it's showing just want to show you all the many, 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 many things that Russia has done to make Ukraine say, there's no way we can trust you. So, independence. So the Soviet Union fell apart, yay. In August 24th, 1991, is Ukrainian Independence Day. Ukrainians voted in a referendum to become an independent nation. In the 1990s, of course, a new country has difficulties. There's Russia trying to control, there's all sorts of things. One thing that was exciting was the Tatars came back to the Crimean Peninsula and started to have their own autonomous republic. 1994, a really important date that you can always use that everybody should know about. This is the Budapest Memorandum. In this memorandum, Ukraine agrees to give up all its nuclear weapons, which was the third largest in the world. They gave up everything in exchange for security assurances from Russia, the United States, and the United Kingdom. So Russia, the United States, and the United Kingdom pledged that they would respect Ukraine's territorial integrity, that they would respect their integrity, and that they would not have military force on Ukraine. These 4 countries agreed on this, and all of them have gone back on their word. So, the invasion of Ukraine started in 2014. First, 2 things that happened were the Crimean Peninsula here was annexed by Russia, and these 2 regions in the east were also taken over by Russia. Kind of more of a puppet state. So Ukraine continued to try to fight to keep them contained. Then in 2022 was the full-scale invasion in February of 2022. As most Ukrainians, I was asleep in bed and heard the explosions going outside, and we woke up to a whole new world. Giving you a map of June 2025. This is Ukraine, all of this. The red is what Russia has control over. The blue is what here and down here is what Ukraine has taken back at this time. So again, I'm up here. You would think it's generally safe, except for all of the missiles, all of the drones coming in from Russia almost every night. It used to be a bad night with 70 drones and missiles. Now, in the last month, it's been 300 to 500. Obviously, our defenses can't get all of those down. It's been a really, really, really hard month. It's been hard being home. It's been hard watching the news. And it continues to be hard. So that's where we are now. We're continuing to fight. So I wanted to give a couple personal stories of some great Ukrainians. The first one is my husband's cousin, Valia. This is Valia and her brother, Victor, and her daughter, Vera. So Valia works at the Antonov Manufacturing Company. They build airplanes and other aircraft, including the largest aircraft in the world, which was shot down on the first days of the war. She would like to retire, but the company still needs her, so she still goes in and works. She's an accountant with the factory. She lives near the factory. She's always lived near the factory. Her daughter also works at the factory. At the beginning of the full-scale invasion, 2022, Vera's husband enlisted, and he was killed in action in January of 2023. So we've had a personal loss in our family with the war also. And they have a grown daughter who will never see her father again. So Valia and Vera both live near the factory. This is a target for Russians. So on April 24th, 2025, a missile hit the house very, very close to her house, maybe 2 of these rooms away. And I saw the news. I said, you're right, Valia, find out she's okay. This was that morning, what it looked like. And I went there in June to see what it was looking like now. And this is the building still, the remnants of it. And I want to point out this old Soviet TV that managed to not get hurt during the bombing. I think that's very interesting that this TV just sits there. Anyway, I don't know if somebody propped it there just to be funny or what, but the TV cracked me up in the midst of tragedy. All the apartments around, all the buildings blew out, or all the windows blew out. Many of the roofs got wrecked, including Valia's. Valia lost all of her windows got shattered, and they didn't have gas. They didn't have water for quite a while, then they didn't have gas for a couple months. They didn't have gas that was running correctly to their home. This is a picture of a school nearby. The school's windows got blown out, so they had to have remote learning for the rest of the school year. And this is a very sad picture of the classmates and friends of a 17-year-old boy who was buried in the rubble during that blast. So at 5 in the morning, all the children were waiting there for news about their classmate. And they waited there all day. Unfortunately, he had died in the attack. When they found him, he was dead. And his father had also been a soldier, so that family lost 2 men to the war. So this was a little tribute that I found next to the burned out building to all the people who had died in the attack that day, of all the people who'd lost their lives. They were just civilians sleeping. It was 4 in the morning, I think, that it happened. Russians always are bombing when late at night so that everybody's in bed sleeping. So that's a little bit about Valia, and I think she's a hero. I just love her. This is my friend Olga and her family. So Olga has a brother who is a soldier. He's been in the war since before 2014. He's fighting. These are her parents. So they were born in Lugansk, which is under Russian control. So they had to leave their home, their yard, everything they had when Russia invaded in 2014. They lost everything. They moved to Irpin, which is a suburb of Kyiv. At that time, or I don't remember exactly what year, but Olga's brother said, come to the hospital and meet these soldiers. They've been wounded. You can cheer them up. Olga goes to the hospital and meets Victor. And Victor was serving with her brother. Victor had lost his leg in the war. Olga and Victor fell in love, and now they have 2 little boys that are, I think, what are they, 5, 6, and 4, I believe. So this is her parents. They also moved to Irpin. When the full-scale invasion happened, they were in Irpin. Russia invades Irpin. This whole family escaped. If you saw the pictures at the beginning of the war where people were running under a bridge that had been bombed out, that's them. We were watching TV and realized that this is Olga and her children running under a bridge. It was awful. So they stayed at different people's apartments and whatever until they could move back till Irpin was free, till they had electricity, till it was safe. This is pictures of their house. Luckily, their house was only damaged and not ruined. I have another friend, the librarian at my school, her house was completely ruined. She lost her house that she'd spent all of her love on her whole life. So that is my Olga. She continues to work. She continues to teach children. She continues to do what she can for the world, and her brother's serving. This is the last couple pictures. I'm sorry, this was really long. Thank you for staying with me. This is a picture of our backyard right before I was leaving. So I just took this picture. I thought it was so beautiful that we could see a rainbow, and I hope, and I brought this picture with me to help remember what we're fighting for. And this is how I get greeted by my mom whenever I come home. She puts up, her and my sister put up a big sign for me when I come home every year. So the last slide, I'll just leave up and you can take a photo of it. I'm a reading teacher. I love books and I love reading. So I have to give you authors so you can study more. These are authors of history that I would recommend. These are 2 historical fiction writers that I would also recommend. So take a picture if you want. I'll just leave those up for you. Okay.
So much.